It is such a gift to our adversaries, and here I speak to as an Israeli, to the jihadists, to continue this unresolved conflict and the endless stream of these images. If you want to get serious about capacitating, empowering moderation, and I agree, by the way, that we have to have a much more nuanced take on what is moderate and what is extreme, and Jeff helped us in trying to plot that, then there are few better things you could do than engage to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The second linkage is this. It is very hard to re-establish the desperately damaged American credibility in the region, absent an effort at going back to active engagement on Israeli-Arab peacemaking. American credibility in the region is obviously crucial to America and to the capacity to advance America's interests. I'd say it's also a very important Israeli interest. Cooperation of America's allies with the US in a reality where the US is so damaged in terms of its standing in the region is made exponentially more difficult, and therefore we're not seeing it happen. The third linkage is that, of course, the Iranian and the Syrian situations are linked to the Iraq situation and are linked to the Lebanon situation and are linked to the Palestinian situation. So if you're not talking to some of those actors, your capacity to move forward on those issues is dramatically weakened. And I'll just quote one very short section from the report. Dealing with Iran and Syria is controversial. Nevertheless, it is our view that in diplomacy, a nation can and should engage its adversaries and enemies to try to resolve conflicts and differences consistent with its own interests. Accordingly, the support group, which they recommend, should actively engage Iran and Syria in its diplomatic dialogue without preconditions. Now, it sounds a bit of a no-brainer. Have we really reached the situation where a report has to say that, and then there's a dramatic kickback against what they've said? The last point I make in terms of the linkage is I would argue that there's such a thing as a positive domino effect. And if you could get movement on the Israeli-Syrian or Israeli-Palestinian track, it's not that tomorrow everyone's carrying flowers instead of weapons in Iraq, and this goes swimmingly, and no one's claiming it is. But there can have a positive knock-on effect, and before anyone says, oh, but doesn't that mean selling out our ally Israel? For the umpteenth time, the only way Israel can guarantee a secure future in that region is by having agreed and recognized borders, by coming to terms with its neighbors, and would you please internalize the fact that we need America's help rather than the opposite to do it. Now, there has been an orchestrated effort to undermine those recommendations. And what worries me is that what you've seen coming out of the American Enterprise Institute, who come out with their own plan called Choosing Victory, and what you've seen coming from the neocon echo chamber, the Iraq Surrender Group, as Gaffney has called it in a Washington Times op-ed, or the Surrender Monkeys in the New York Post, or Richard Pearl's piece on Democracy Defeated. All these things are out there, and yet, number one, they don't seem to reflect where American public opinion is at. And number two, we haven't yet seen enough by way of a counter-echo chamber. The World Public Opinion Poll, and you can get it on their website, has checked some of the recommendations. And they found that 75% of Americans support engaging with Iran and Syria. Pew asked the same question, and they came out with 69%. Unfortunately, the Democrat foreign policy establishment, I think for two reasons, have just chosen not to get behind this. One of the reasons for some of them, I think, is simply not invented here. Those who weren't part of the study group, which is a common phenomenon everywhere, it's just a shame. And the other one is the timidity that unfortunately tends to characterize the debate around the Middle East very often. The progressive community hasn't got behind the report. I think because the report wasn't clear enough in its recommendations on what should happen internally in Iraq, because it didn't say everyone out as quick as possible, which one could never expect it to say. But did the Baker-Hamilton Commission really have to use the language of, dude, where's my diplomacy? Or diplomatic fools and the foolish diplomatic follies they follow, in order for progressives to understand that this was a golden thing that they should be making more use of? Unfortunately, as so often happens, it's been left to the Chuck Hagels of this world to come out and make the sensible comments in support of this. And by the way, I would say certain politicians, and here I think Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, who traveled to Damascus and did the right thing by engaging, and he traveled to Jerusalem and he told both sides what he was hearing, and apparently Senators Kerry and Dodd are following in that path, and Senator Specter on the other side will be doing the same. I've mentioned the Syria thing, so let me just touch on this because people may not be aware, and Ori mentioned it in passing, of something unusual that's been going on in the last days in Israel, literally in the last days. I don't know whether this was an excuse, but in the cabinet meeting on Sunday morning in Jerusalem, in Israel, Prime Minister Olmert said, we can't engage with Syria, and this came off the back, as many of you will be aware, of not only Senator Nelson's visit, but off of a very important interview by Foreign Minister Walid Muallim in the Washington Post with David Ignatius, talking about no preconditions to beginning talks, and it came off the back of Assad's comments to the Italian La Repubblica newspaper, where he said, rather smartly, if they think we're playing a game and trying to fool them, call our bluff. Come to the talks and show that we're not interested in peace. And Prime Minister Olmert turned around and said, we can't do it because America doesn't want us to.